Guys, the countdown continues. Join me now as we go back to the arcades. Early 90s. I mean, give me a time machine, give me a DeLorean, and let me just punch in 1992. Oh, God almighty. We'll go to the arcades. We'll go outside, we'll have a smoke. Alright? We'll listen to it. What else did you hear in the early 90s? You heard 5.0 Mustangs. Remember 5.0 Mustangs? With Flowmasters. That was the big thing. Everybody had a GT Mustang with Flowmasters. You could hear it from 5 miles away. Like, oh yeah, Mustang Flowmasters. It was like the thing to do. God almighty. You see an 87, 88 Mustang GT anymore? It used to be you couldn't walk down the street without having one pass you by. Now you can't find them anywhere. Jesus Christ. Want to go back to the arcades? Don't we all want to go back to the arcades? Tell me right now if you could go back to the arcades, what that experience would be like. I'm talking about the early 90s. Wouldn't it be great to go back to the early 90s and walk into the arcade? Oh. I have such vivid pictures in my mind of the arcade. I remember going in there and there was Street Fighter 2. You ready for this? This was before, I think, even Hyper Edition came out. Or all those different variations. How many different variations of Street Fighter 2 came out? Oh my God, you could throw the Hadouken fireballs all over the place.
One, fight! Hadouken! 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 Like that bird!
Oh God, I used to love the fighting games, man. I used to crank the volume on the fighting games. Street Fighter 2. Then there was Fighters History. Anytime there was a new, I remember walking into the arcade and there was a brand new fighting arcade in there. And you know how you could tell? Because there was a million people surrounding the machine. And for some reason, when the new machine came in, they cranked the volume all the way up. Oh my God, it was great. But let me tell you something right now. Street Fighter 2 is still the king. The best, listen, the most popular fighting arcades were always toward the front. They were all in line. And they were always toward the front. So you had Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 duked it out with every other fighting machine for I don't know how long. People played Street Fighter 2 like it was religious. Mortal Kombat. Then it was, I remember the brand new arcade. Oh, you know something? This might have trumped Mortal Kombat. It was Fighters History. Fighters History. Anybody remember when that one came out? I remember just sitting there with my mouth hanging open. And because they had the volume cranked up so loud. And there was one kid that was sitting there with this character. I don't know the name of the characters in this game. But the character that he had kept on doing this move. And the guy would sound, he would go like this. It would sound like he was saying this. It was something in Japanese. He'd go, "Hey, gonna move a check! Hey, gonna move a check!" And I'll never forget that. It was so loud. Burnt into my brain. Fighters History. I remember that. And then after that, things would go downhill. You'd have Mortal Kombat there, right? And then you'd have Beast Battler. Was it Beast Battler where it was like two monsters that would wrestle each other? And then like one, they would do like not a suplex, a pile driver, and they would jump up in the air, and the guy would do like this freaking spinning pile driver and smash the guy into the mat. Oh, the game was awesome.
You are a bug to me!
It was awesome. But right next to that was Time Killers. Does anybody remember Time Killers? I don't think so, because nobody ever talks about Time Killers in the arcade. This game, you could pick characters from like various times. You had a samurai, you had like this praying mantis, space alien, you had a guy named Rancid. I remember the character's name, Rancid, who was like a guy from slightly in the future, but a human with a chainsaw arm. He's like a punk. I remember he had it like an X, like scar of an X on his forehead. And who else? You had a samurai from feudal Japan.
Well done, Mutashi.
Oh my God! And the greatest and the best guy to use was the Viking, because after he cut your goddamn head off, he'd raise his axe in the air and he'd go, Odin! You had a caveman.
Well done, Mutashi.
Who kind of looked like Andre the Giant, actually. And I had kind of like that big dumb face. Anyhow. So what was the story with this game? It was a weapons-based fighter. This was brand new. There was no fighting game out that used weapons. I think the next fighting game that came out that actually utilized weapons might have been Samurai Showdown. This was before Samurai Showdown. Anyway, you know, like, that guy Rancid, he would have like a chainsaw. The samurai would have sword. This space alien had like these claws or whatnot. It was a weapons-based fighter. And I remember you could control like the right arm and the left arm independently. The right leg and the left leg with different buttons. I think there was like 5 buttons. And what would happen was, you'd have almost like, you'd have what they call a death move, where you would press all 5 buttons during a fight, and if your opponent didn't block it, you'd lop his head off. And that was the end of the fight.
Well done, Matrix. Well done, Bandit. Well done, Lord Wolf.
And there was also a fatality move where if you stunned somebody, I remember you hit all 5 buttons again, and it would go into, like, you chop the guy to pieces.
Well done, Dog. Well done, Dad. Well done.
Basically, arms, legs flying everywhere. But during the fight, you could actually get your arm severed off, and the guy would continue to fight. You could like saw a guy's arm off or cut a guy's arm off, and he would actually continue to fight. And it would get to the point where you could saw both of his arms off, and he could just, all he had was his head to fight with, and he didn't have the ability to block anymore. So you basically toast after that. Oh my God! But I saw this game, Time Killers, and I was just like, I remember the game would start out, you'd pick your characters, and then all of a sudden the whole background would start to twist, and you'd almost like go into, the characters would spin down like they were going back into a certain time. And I guess depending on what character you pick, that's the board that you would land on. It was like Street Fighter 2. It was like Street Fighter 2 with weapons and fatalities. And I remember, because I followed this game, I immediately ran to my, EGM magazine or Game Pro magazine. It was probably EGM. And I remember seeing that Time Killers was coming out for the Sega Genesis. And it was actually slated to come out for the Super Nintendo. And what a big surprise that the Super Nintendo didn't release it, because it was way too graphic for the time. I've never played the Genesis version.
Time Killer.
I remember they released it really late. I mean, I want to say years and years later, when everybody was like, at that point, it was like everybody had moved on to bigger and better things. Had that game been released a little shortly after the arcade came out, it would have been a different story altogether. Time Killers. Guys, you just tuned into the greatest video game program in the history of human civilization. And you better believe that.